Hello, I'm Nicholas Henshall, and this is my Dean's Letter for Saturday, the 30th of January, even though I realise it's now Sunday, the 31st of January. This is how weekends go in lockdown, I fear. I've called this week's letter Sacramental. Quite a complex argument I'm trying to put across here, but it's about how we see God in all things, Standing in the bay window of my daughter's flat, that was before this current lockdown, of course, I saw an amazing rainbow dramatically framing the whole of the south side of Glasgow. Now, rainbows are, of course, a natural phenomenon, but the Hebrew and Christian scriptures invite us to see natural phenomena as a whole, as shot through with the glory of God and as signs of God's blessing. Today we use rainbows for everything from pride festivals to affirming frontline care workers and health workers during COVID. The biblical tradition invites us to see them as signs of God's promise for the whole created order, of a love that God will never withdraw, will never give up on. As God says to Noah in chapter 9 of Genesis, "When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." This is extraordinary. This is not a covenant between God and human beings or God and a favoured people, but with the whole created order. That's picked up in John's Gospel, for instance, in John 3:17, where John literally writes, "For God sent his Son into the cosmos, not to condemn the cosmos, but that the cosmos might be saved through him." This extraordinary scope of God's love, which is without limit. Now, this way of looking at the world as a sign of God's glory and a means of God's grace is what I want to call sacramental, a sacramental way of looking at the world. Now, that's something that's been natural to Jews and Christians for most of our history, but which has become increasingly lost in Western Christianity. And I think that's seriously damaging when sacramental thinking has something important to say to our present realities. Sacramental itself may not be the most helpful word, but it's what we've got. It's a Latin word, a language that loves to define things with absolute clarity. Of course, the language and culture of the church of the first 3 centuries was Greek, which delights in words having multiple shades of meaning, all at the same time. Instead of sacrament, Greek uses the word mystery, and I find that closer to the mark. So what is a sacrament? The typical Western formula has been an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. I've never found that terribly helpful, to be honest, and I'd rather settle for signs of God's blessing and avenues of God's grace. Classically, most Christian traditions would recognise that baptism and Holy Communion are the key sacraments, rooted as they are in the ministry and practice of Jesus. Beyond that, different traditions have anything from 3 to 7 sacraments, and in the High Middle Ages, one theologian suggested there were 33 sacraments, one for each year of Jesus' life. That didn't catch on. Baptism and Holy Communion are church ordinances, signs of God's blessing and avenues of God's grace, which the church performs as a key part of its mission and self-understanding. These sacraments are always public. They stand at the heart of the corporate life of the Christian community. They cannot be private or privatised. They cannot be with or for a particular group of people, but always for and with and of the whole church. And that's why ordained ministers preside at these sacraments. They're the publicly and permanently authorised representatives of the Christian community. And that makes it explicit that sacraments are never private. To this day, an ordained minister who celebrates communion elsewhere than a public church building needs the written permission of the bishop. Now, that can sound like a piece of old-fashioned legalism, but in fact its purpose is precisely to demonstrate that sacraments are always public and always corporate, signs that we are one body rather than an agglomeration of independent congregations. But let's get back to rainbows. The church has rather too easily cultivated the sense that just because sacraments stand at the heart of the church, then that's the only source of grace. In fact, it's completely the other way round. Part of the invitation of the sacraments that we celebrate together as a corporate body, the church, is to help us to understand that the whole world and everything in it is sacramental, shot through with God's glory and avenues of God's grace. So the rainbow from my daughter's window takes me straight back to God's promise to Noah, breaking bread and sharing a glass of wine with friends and family. Well, that takes me straight to the upper room with Jesus. That's why I think I've always been so eager as an advocate of saying grace before meals, the meal in love and fellowship with family and friends where the Lord himself is present, not as a pious tradition, but as a way of consecrating every meal as a sacramental encounter with one another and with the Lord, a place where we sit at table with the Lord and receive his grace. Even breakfast can do that, even though I'm never feeling great at that time of day. In the same way, standing up to my knees in Admiral Park in water the other day when the Chelmer and the Can managed to overthrow simultaneously takes me straight to the River Jordan, the baptism of Jesus and the promise of new life in his name. These and so many others are the daily household sacraments we are invited to celebrate and to which the corporate and public sacraments of the Church point. A colleague recently introduced me to a book called Everyday Holy from an unusual Christian community in Nashville, Tennessee. To my delight, it provides prayers and thanksgivings for putting the washing out, for hoovering the carpet, maybe even standing in awe at a rainbow. Everything has the capacity to become sacramental, not just bread, wine, oil and water. Everything has the capacity to speak of God's blessing and become an avenue of God's grace. The purpose of our regular corporate sacramental practice in church is precisely to remind us of that truth and to invite us to pay attention to God's presence and action in God's world. And especially at a time when we cannot meet as a corporate body to share in the formal sacraments, we are invited all the more to see the whole universe as sacramental. So God bless you in this week ahead. The flooding is beginning to subside in central Chelmsford. It's been very exciting to see just how well the flood defences work, but also to see the rivers flowing in full spate. The swans have been having a ball. Have a great week, if that's not a stupid thing to say. We go forward always in praise, whatever the outward circumstances of our lives, and the challenges of the present are not small. But it's been great just to be with you, and evening prayer I'll be following at 5:15. I don't know who's leading it today. It's not me, I know that. And if you haven't, I thought this morning's Eucharist from the cathedral actually was, I thought the sound was beautiful, I thought the pictures are beautiful, I thought Elspeth's singing was beautiful, and I'd recommend watching it again or for the first time if you haven't done already. God bless you.